Jo, thank you so much for joining me in Cumbernauld. We're about 15 miles out of Glasgow now in the Cumbernauld Living Landscape. Can you tell me a bit about the story of it?
Yeah, the Cumbernauld Living Landscape is one of 3 living landscapes that the Scottish Wildlife Trust has across Scotland. And this is a brilliant example of how the local community has become really involved in helping to improve the quality of green spaces, helping to think about how we can better connect those green spaces and get more people benefiting from and accessing those green spaces.
Brilliant. So how has this landscape been transformed and what kind of nature-based solutions have been implemented here?
Well, we're standing right next to a brilliant example of a nature-based solution. So this is one of a series of ponds that we created in partnership a few years ago with Scottish Water, and it's called a sustainable urban drainage system. So there are 6 ponds that were created because of a problem of pollution. So the industrial estate was causing runoff, so a kind of pollution that goes into the watercourse, into rivers and streams, and that is obviously not good for wildlife, but it was also causing Scottish Water a problem in terms of water quality, but also surface water causes flooding. So we worked with Scottish Water to create this series of ponds which absorb water, slow down the runoff, and also filter all of those pollutants so that by the time the runoff gets to the burn, called the red burn, it's much cleaner. So it's better for wildlife, it's better for people, and it's better for Scottish Water as well.
Oh, fantastic. And of course, we're on the doorstep of housing developments as well. So it increases access to nature. Has this improved access to nature for people, and how does that transform people's lives?
Well, the thing about Cumbernauld is that even within the town, not everybody was aware that actually 50% of Cumbernauld is green space. So one of the things that we've been doing through the Cumbernauld Living Landscape project is to help people realise what wildlife is on their doorstep, understand that there's lots of amazing species like badgers and bats and otters and dragonflies that they can actually see without having to travel a long way away. And we've worked with people to help people enjoy wildlife, but also to improve their mental health and their well-being as well.
Amazing. And has that inspired future generations to look after places like this?
Yeah, we've seen people of all ages get involved in the Cumbernauld Living Landscape, and we've got a group of volunteers called Nature Ninjas, and they've been absolutely brilliant. So they help us look after habitats for wildlife, and that includes removing invasive non-native species that are causing harm. It includes helping with tree planting. We've actually planted thousands of trees in Cumbernauld, native trees, which again are going to help people in the town, but also help wildlife.
So what can the Scottish Government do to increase places like this and ensure we can have more Scottish Wildlife Trust projects like this?
I think it's all about thinking big and understanding that everything is connected. So what we would like to see is for Scotland to take the opportunity to build on the really positive action that has already happened in relation to peatlands, for example. And there are peatlands here in Cumbernauld as well, and they lock up huge amounts of carbon if they're restored, as well as delivering other benefits as well. But we want to go beyond that. So we want to think about, urban environments and peri-urban environments like this to understand that nature-based solutions can exist everywhere. So also in farming environments, for example. So agricultural nature-based solutions, urban nature-based solutions. The marine environment is also another really important part of that story. So we want to think big, we want to embed that within the economic strategy, and there's growing recognition that our whole economy is underpinned by nature, so that needs to be reflected in the economic strategy, and also we need targets. We need really clear legislative targets like we've got for climate change, and they're on their way, so we just need those targets for nature as soon as possible.
Brilliant. So we need to think big and we need to put nature on the same level as we do for climate change. Is that right?
Absolutely. And the two are so closely linked. We have to tackle the two problems together of climate change, the loss of nature. But the good news is that nature-based solutions like this can actually help us do just that. So by helping nature, we're also helping to tackle climate change.